So let's now implement this together. And I will start by setting up all my models. And I want to set up all my models together before I then start adding data or anything like this, because you saw in the last course section that if you add models and relations step by step, you always have to take care that you update the existing data and you might run into problems there. That's why I'll first of all set everything up and then I'm going to add the data. And hence we'll start with the models.py file in the blog application folder in this overall project, because that is where we do add our models. And I'll start with the post model, which extends models.Model, just as you learned it a couple of sections ago. Now, if we have a look at our data plan here, then we see that a post should have a title, excerpt, image name, date, slug, and content, and the connections to author and tag. Now, I'll dive into the relations in a second. I want to start with the other fields first. So I'll add a title field here and set this to models.what. Title is a text, and it shouldn't be a super long text, so I'll set this to CharField and give it a max length of, let's say, 150. It's up to you which length you pick here, of course. Then I want to add an excerpt. And that typically, of course, is a bit of a longer text, longer than the title, but it also shouldn't be super long. It's still an excerpt after all. It should just be one paragraph or something like this. So therefore here, I'll again also use the char field and add a max length of, let's say, 200, so that it's a bit longer but not super long. Now we also need the image name. Now for the moment, it's just the name and not the image itself, because we're going to talk about file upload in a separate section later. So for the moment, my idea is that we pick one of the static image names and we store that in the database. That's of course not 100% realistic, because it limits us in which images we can add, but it's just a temporary solution until we later also are able to add real upload. So here I'll just add image name and also set this equal to a char field, because it is just the name of an image which we want to store, and that's probably not longer than 100 characters, or it shouldn't be longer than that. Now a post also has a date, and here I don't want a char field, but a date field. Now that is a field we haven't used thus far in the previous sections, so it's probably worth to take a look at the official docs for that. We can simply Google for django.db to find the model field reference, and there we can jump to the date field definition. And here we see that the date field basically represents a date based on the Python DateTimeDate instance, which is quite convenient as a side note, because previously we also created dates with that date function from Python datetime. And there we can set all the default options like blank and null and so on. And we have the auto now and auto now add options as well. With those, we can automatically set the date whenever the field is saved, so whenever the object is saved to be precise, or only when it's first created. And I want to indeed have a date which is always updated whenever we update the data, so auto now, which sets the date and updates the date whenever data is saved, sounds like a good selection here. Hence, back in models.py, I'll set my date field here, and I'll add this auto now option and set this to true, so that it's automatically set whenever we save data based on this model. Now we also want a slug here to have this search engine friendly URL from which we can read that slug, which acts as a unique identifier. So here we can set this to models.SlugField, and I now want to add a couple of options here. To be precise, here I want to set unique to true, and that's a setting we haven't used thus far, but since I want to use the slug as a unique identifier for getting my posts, I want to ensure that it really is unique, and I want Django and SQL to check this and to warn me if I would try to save a post with a slug that already exists on another post. That's why I'm adding this. And I'll also add db index here and set this to true to let Django and SQL create an index for that field to make querying and filtering based on it a bit more effective. Though, actually, we can't even skip that, because if we have a look at the slug field documentation, we see that field db index is set to true automatically anyways there. Which does not mean that we can't set it again. That won't be a problem in any way, but we also don't have to do it. And actually, we can omit this db index option not just because a slug field automatically indexes this, but because unique true also implies an index. So since I have unique true, an index would have been created automatically anyways, just as an index would have been set automatically since it's a slug field. So we really don't need to add this. It's definitely an index, and still we can leave it there if we want to make it really clear that it's indexed. But you could remove it. So that's the slug, which is now also set. Last but not least, we'll have content. So the main content of our post. And that's now a longer text, a very long text potentially. And therefore here we don't want to use a char field, since that is really meant for shorter text, which is why you need to set the max length. Instead here we want to use the text field. And that's also a field we haven't used before, but if we dive into the text field documentation, we see that it's a large text field, and that therefore this is what we want to add here. We can add max length there as well, but we don't have to. And instead here I'll add validators, which you don't have to, but which I want to add here, to make sure that we actually have a min length validator, which I need to import from django.core.validators. And there I want to import the min length validator and initialize this here, instantiate min length validator, and expect a min content length of 10. This is totally optional. I didn't specify it on the slide before, but it is something I want to do here. With that, I'll auto format this, and now this is my basic post model. Let's move on to the other models and the relations.